Welcome back to the Wealth Conversation. Today I have Richard Ansah in the studio with me, and we will be talking all things wills, trust, inheritance tax planning.
Right.
Welcome, Richard, to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Great. I am going to start us off with a statistic that I found when I was doing a bit of research on this.
Yeah.
I like to try and check this because I heard about the number of adults who have wills in the UK many years ago. And I thought, oh, this is very interesting. So I thought I'd get an updated figure. So the UK Wills and Probate Consumer Research Report 2025 states that 41% of UK adults have written a will. And that's up actually from 38% in 2024. So that's good.
That's good.
But still, that's less than 50%.
Yes.
Less than 50%. And apparently, according to this report, the people who tend to prepare for estate planning are aged 55.
Yeah.
But yet most of that age group don't have wills.
Right.
And then I also discovered that for most people, the reason why they don't write the will is they just say, oh, I just haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah. They wait for something to happen before, or about to happen.
Wow, that is shocking. So I thought I'd start with that. But before we get into the depths of this conversation, Richard, please tell us more a bit about yourself, what you do, and your passion for wills, trusts, and inheritance planning.
Oh, no, thank you. Now, the stats always kind of move a little bit around, but yes, pretty much bang on. But in terms of myself, I'm a private wealth advisor. So I specialize in inheritance tax planning and trusts. I love the subject matter. Our company once stands for Own Nothing, Control Everything. And we predominantly help business owners who love their families. So we work with them to really protect their wealth and direct it in a very strategic and efficient way. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
That's amazing. I love that. Own nothing, control everything.
Yeah, the secret to wealth. It's a quote. It's actually from a quote originally. I believe it is David Rockefeller.
Okay.
I remember reading an article years ago. I can't find it now, but I remember reading it, and he had made something like $300 million in a year. It's like 100 years ago.
Wow. No
tax being paid at all, and the reporter asked, how do you make that kind of money and not pay any tax? And then his response was, well, the secret to wealth is to own nothing and control everything. So that always stuck with me. Yeah.
That makes so much sense, though. We're so obsessed with owning things, buy a property and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's more about, as you say, as the quote said, control. All you want is to control it and be able to get with it an income or capital out of it. That is very interesting. I feel like that's a topic for another podcast. So watch out, Richard. I'll be calling you back.
No worries.
When I was looking on your LinkedIn page, I saw another quote which says, wealth is not defined by how much money you make, but how much money you keep.
Yeah.
And that's something I really subscribe to. It's not, you can make billions, but if you don't keep any of it, what is it?
Exactly.
So I really love talking about this topic because it's about how people can protect their wealth, especially for the next generation.
Yeah.
And I do think it's something we should all be considering, especially certain communities, because I don't think that conversation is happening enough.
Right.
But definitely what the stats show is that this is an issue that all communities need to be talking about. I'm really, really looking forward to what you have to share with us.
Yeah, sure.
What I would like to know from you is what is a will and what is a trust?
Okay.
Yeah.
So a will. Is a trust. I mean, the legal definition is a testamentary trust, so it only comes alive when someone dies, and it instructs, or the person that writes the will is called a testator or testatrix if you're a female, giving instructions to an administrator or executor to distribute their estate, either giving it to loved ones, etc. So it is a trust, but it only comes into play when someone dies.
Okay.
Everyone will have a will of some form. The challenge is, do you have one that you want to write and you control, or the one that the government gives you? So you have a government version, okay, called the rules of intestacy. So everyone will be either given a will, or you can have the opportunity to write your own. And so it's very important to have a will. I call it more a wealth plan. People see it as a taboo subject. Oh, well, death is not around the corner just yet, so I don't want to think about that. But I'd say 100% of the clients that I deal with, once they've written and signed their will, they're like, it's a weight off their shoulders. You can literally see the peace in their eyes. It's one less thing to think about. I think people live a lot longer because they've got that less stress.
That is very interesting. That's interesting. I will say that when I did my will, I felt exactly that way.
Yeah.
I really did. And I did it when I was, in my, I think 30s. It just felt like, oh, wow. One, it was off my list.
Yeah.
It had taken me so long to do it. It was sitting at the back of my mind, weighing me down.
Yeah.
And suddenly I just felt like, right, I can get on and just live life.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's very important.
Yeah.
And the final thing I'd say about a will, I'd say it's a fundamental wealth plan to have, no matter where you may be on wealth is relative anyway. But I think it's important that individuals or families, married couples, whatever, have one to distribute their wealth. Now, wealth is not just money. It could be how you want your children looked after if you passed away before that they reach adulthood, or if you have pets and animals, who you want to raise them, or if you have certain particular views about your wealth, maybe go to certain charities or foundations. So it's super important that your views and your visions are written down for someone else to follow and carry them out. No matter, a lot of people hear what I do and think, oh, I'm not rich enough to speak to you. I'm like, well, it's not about that. It's sometimes you have no choice and just do it in the best manner possible. So that's a will in a nutshell. We can go deeper later. A trust, so I'm going to call it a lifetime trust, is a device, I'd say, or a legal mechanism that you would set up to protect an asset, literally where you are the one controlling and not owning. And it's normally, you'd use a trust for asset protection purposes or for inheritance tax planning or both. And you want to distribute the wealth to loved ones and family with control. Even if so basically I say your voice is still heard even when you're no longer here. Because in England and Wales, they last 125 years, and you have trustees who would give them very wide powers, depending on the type of trust, to manage that wealth on your behalf, or on behalf of the trust, but based on the wishes that you've established. So it's really important to have a trust for certain instances. It's not always relevant. I mean, I draft a lot of trust in wills, but lifetime trusts are also very important depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. All right. Now, I'm interested in what you talked about when you said there are two types of wills. One that you write yourself, and you can be given a will by the state.
Yeah.
Are there pros and cons to just leaving it and getting the will from the state? Because I can imagine someone listening to this conversation thinking, well, why should I write a will then? I'll just get the one from the state. And we're talking about UK wills. Yeah. It might be different in other countries.
I can't think of any pro.
Okay.
For allowing the government to dictate where your wealth goes. I personally can't. So unless you're an individual that just doesn't really care, then maybe, perhaps, potentially. But otherwise, it's important because the way it works, depending on who's alive when that person passed away, you may not get on with your family members, you may not like your family members, maybe depending if you're married or not, you don't want the wealth going in certain directions. Is it Liam Payne who passed away?
Yes.
Suddenly and tragically. I'm sure with his wealth, no will in place, which, you got 30, 40 million pounds worth of wealth. You definitely got wealth advisors, but he's young. They're probably thinking, well, you don't have to worry about that. I'm sure there's around about £9 to £10 million of inheritance tax being paid. He wasn't married. Thankfully, his child or son will get that wealth, but he hasn't received all of the wealth that maybe he could have done. It's going to be managed by his mother. We pray that it's managed, and a lawyer.
Yes.
So we pray that's managed appropriately. Once he's 18, he can do what he wants, and the lawyers and his mum can't do a thing.
Yeah.
Which may not be a good idea. The law's set in stone, so you can't change that. Whereas if a will was drafted, and maybe some lifetime planning was done, I'm sure even if tax had to be paid, it wouldn't have been 40%, which is a big chunk of change. And then, it'd be wrapped up in trusts or vehicles. If his son gets married in the future, it's not going to go in the wrong direction. So you can see having a planned approach versus just a ad hoc approach to planning. Your wealth planning, we don't do ad hoc, right? We want to be strategic.
Exactly.
So I can't see any benefit of having a government will.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, it's so interesting when you talk about people without wills. We know a lot of people maybe in our circles who've passed away or families that have been affected by that. But people like Prince didn't have a will. Aretha Franklin didn't have a will. I believe even Bob Marley didn't have a will.
Exactly.
And for me, some of those cases, especially Bob Marley, he died pretty young. You've mentioned Liam Payne now, died pretty young. It sort of speaks to how early you need to start thinking about these sort of things. I say to people, do it as soon as you become an adult. So at 18, you can always review it because you just don't know how much wealth you're going to accumulate. I had no idea Liam Payne's level of wealth until he passed away, and he had a lot of wealth.
Exactly.
Millions and millions. Yeah, so it's really important for people to start thinking about this early.
It really is. Yeah. And again, not just the money side, but also just it does affect the family. They're the ones that will suffer really badly if they were expecting some money, or people will be fighting now because nothing was defined.
Yes.
Even as far as the burial, like having a plan of the colours you like and the music you want, and doing a horse-drawn cart or cremation. I mean, when the family have less things to think about and they can grieve, there's less argument, less bickering, less problems. So it really does help just to keep the peace.
Yeah.
Money aside, it does help. So, I mean, just to be technical, the will it's not legally binding on a funeral, but having a plan alongside that does help.
Yeah. Great. You mentioned tax. Can we just touch on inheritance tax in the UK?
Yeah.
What is it, and what does it do to someone's wealth when they don't plan?
Okay. So the technical term for inheritance tax is a tax on the transfer of wealth. So normally wealth is transferred when someone dies. It can be done during lifetime, and it can be affected on different legal instruments such as trusts, predominantly trusts. So, but for individuals, it's a big deal. And there is a threshold or a nil rate band that once it exceeds that level, it will trigger. So we have to plan for that because inflation, as you're well aware, is a killer. It's a silent tax. And house prices are going up, wealth is going up. So people can fall into the threshold of inheritance tax. And it's very interesting how the rates, the band is not changed.
Yes.
But inflation still continues to increase. So people will fall into it by accident and not realize. And even more so, it doesn't matter what part of the country you're in now, whether you're in the more expensive south or north, it could affect you quite badly. And then a lot of people don't realize the size of their estates or what makes up their estates. I have a lot of people say to me, well, I haven't inherited anything, so why am I paying tax? And I'm like, well, no, we've misunderstood. So that's inheritance tax per se. in terms of how to work it out, just keep it really, really simple.
Yeah.
The actual banding or limitation is 325,000 for an individual. If you are own a home and you've occupied that home and you have a child or children, and that's quite a wide definition. It's a very complicated allowance, but keeping it simple, then you can claim an additional allowance. We call it the residence allowance. That's additional 175,000. So an individual can have up to £500,000 of an allowance. That in itself, I say, it's quite complicated because it starts to taper off once your wealth exceeds £2 million. So it could disappear.
Yes.
And then if you're married, then you can combine the allowances, or the surviving spouse can claim the allowance of the deceased up to 100%. Bit of technicality around that, but ultimately up to £1 million for married couples can be claimed before inheritance tax is triggered. So that's it in a very brief nutshell.
Okay. And the sort of top line tax, what's that percentage?
So it's 40%.
40%.
Yeah.
So almost half your entire wealth goes to tax.
Yes.
After you've been paying income tax and all sorts of taxes along the way.
I think your notional taxes in our lifetime is what I've read there, something in the 90% we're paying in our lifetime.
Yes. Yeah, when you add it all up, exactly.
And then to have 40% on death,
yes.
Well, what's the
point? of all of that.
Exactly. And it can be prevented, inheritance tax. It just requires planning in advance.
Yeah, yeah. And which is why someone like you is so important in our lives. Can I just ask why you chose this field?
Yeah.
Is there a story behind it, or because why would someone want to go and write wills and trusts? I can understand the wealth management side of things because that's what I do. But I'd be interested to know if there was anything that encouraged you to focus on this area.
So my background is actually engineering. So I love problem solving. I love it. I always joke and say I got 2.5 degrees. I studied engineering up to PhD level. I've always had finance jobs, but I didn't fall into wills and trusts. I wouldn't say it's an accident. It's just a life experience. So very, very, very quick whistle-stop tour of my background. So I quit corporate world. Got into financial services. I was actually a mortgage broker. Bought lots of properties as well. So I was into a landlord. Then the credit crunch 2008 took place.
Right.
So all of that just disappeared. The business was liquidated. So I experienced a very ugly world of debts and wealth and the bailiffs and bankruptcy and all that kind of stuff. And I realized and learn about trust. That's how I really got to understand everything is a trust, really. That way the Commonwealth, I'll say the Commonwealth system, not just England and Wales, but just how everything's set up. Relationships are predicated on trusts. We're not going too deep. So when I studied all of that and realized I was just passionate and just loved the legal side and equity side of trust and what it meant and, the history and the courts and, going to court and seeing it in action, very beautiful to me anyway. So I thought, well, I'd love to go into wills then, and help people more. Yeah. But wills on its own as a will writer, because it's unlike your industry, it's an unregulated part of law. Yes. So most areas of law is regulated by the SRA. But what they call private client law is not regulated. So trusts, inheritance tax planning is self-regulated, but it's not technically regulated. Most of the legal side of wealth is not a regulated part of the industry, which is interesting. But it's probably a very, very technical part of the industry. So I became a will writer, but I was like, I wasn't making any money. I didn't know how to turn objections and explain to someone why they need a will. They'll say, why do I need a will? And I couldn't answer their questions.
Yeah.
I didn't understand the law. I just understand the very basics of wills. And that's, okay, I don't understand this. I don't know what's going on here. Then I got introduced to estate planning. And then I realized, right, okay, so now the problem solving started to come into effect. And that was it. I was sold. I'm a bookworm. I think my nickname, one of them is an academic salesman. So I was in the books. I studied. I got all the books I could get my hands on, and then got into inheritance tax and going to trusts. And then I became STEP qualified, which is a worldwide organization for society of trust and estate practitioners.
Yes.
And then became an expert in inheritance tax and trust. So therefore I could help people a lot more than a standard will writer.
Yeah.
And then get very technical and very complex, and then get into the business world because it's really business owners that are going to really experience a lot of the hits on tax, because they produce a lot of wealth in the country. So I specialize in helping business owners and those who actually, most business owners are self-employed. They love their families. They work hard to help their family. So I'm like, well, that's who I'm going to want to help.
Yeah.
I help everyone, but that's who we target.
Yeah, that's your target market.
So then you get into other areas of inheritance tax, where trusts is important, but there's the key areas of taxation besides inheritance tax is capital gains tax, income tax, stamp duty. So when we're speaking to clients, it's always hovering in the conversation, depending on what is going on. And then HMRC are very, very, very strict, with how things should be done. So the compliance is just immense. So that's why I got into it. I just love the technicality.
Yeah.
And then solving problems. So someone will come to me with a situation. I'm like, okay, so how can we make this work?
Yes.
Here's a solution. All the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed. HMRC shouldn't have an issue with this. Accountants should have an issue with this. Compliance, tax advisors shouldn't have an issue with this. Sometimes even wealth managers, okay, right, this is your world, regulated, can we do something?
Yeah.
So now you've got a team trying to help people protect their wealth and then pass it down and transfer it to the next generation, ideally with minimal tax or no tax at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really what I love. And I'm passionate because I've been there, done that, got a T-shirt. It's not just an exercise in a book of what could happen. I've lived it.
Yes.
So I don't want to see other people go through it.
Yeah. No, definitely. It's that makes such a difference if you've had that lived experience. So just thinking about the business owner, trust or will or both, what should they focus on to begin with? Because I can imagine these are people their brains they're focused on so many other things.
On what they do well, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. A will is absolutely fundamental no matter who you are and what you do. But the challenges with a will compared to a trust is that we see it's like a tin of baked beans. I know it's like a weird analogy, but a tin of baked beans is a tin of baked beans. Whether you buy it from Harrods, whether you buy it from other supermarkets,
yes,
or your general corner shop,
yes,
generally speaking, it's a tin of baked beans. So you get what's on the tin. Maybe you pay a different price, but you get what's on the tin. Whereas a will, it's not what's on the tin. It's not what just because it says
a trust.
will. No, a trust is slightly different. But
okay.
A will, we just see this piece of paper. It says a will, and we say, right, the box is being ticked. And I speak to people who have wills, and the wills are not right for their situation. So a will is really unique for the individual. And it's so important that people understand that. It's not just, oh, I've got one, so I'm fine. It's, okay, so what's your situation now versus when it was written? Have you had advice? And because most will writers are not inheritance tax specialists, they do not touch the subject because it's out of their remit and they don't want to get sued. The client doesn't know what they don't know, so they think everything's fine. And I'll address the inheritance tax side of their situation. I'm like, but I didn't know all of this.
Yes.
And now it's like, wow, okay. So if you don't do A, B, C, D, this could potentially happen. And then probate, which is a whole another industry, which most will writers and even private wealth advisors may not be aware of, but it's a big deal because probate is a natural next step when someone passes away.
Yes.
And it has its own set of rules. And the will is part of that process. And so if we don't understand the next steps and potentially how to avoid it or even circumvent certain situations, the will's great, but it's like, well, I'm still having problems.
Yeah.
So the reason why I call myself a private wealth advisor, we look at all of these situations, inheritance tax, trusts, just estate planning per se, and potential probate situations. So that it's just a one-stop shop, and we pride ourselves that the client can make a fully informed decision because they've got all the facts ahead of them, as opposed to just a piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
So a will is crucial, but everyone's different.
Yes.
And so therefore we've got to treat them specific to what that person or family want. So it's not just because it says a will at the front, it does what it's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And that to me is so, so vital.
Yeah. And talking about people being different and their situations being different.
Yeah.
What do single people have to consider?
Yeah.
Married couples have to consider when putting trusts and wills together, and blended families?
Yes. That's a really good question. Again, because a lot of people say to me, oh, how much is it for a will? And I can't answer the question because I don't know your situation. And we personally, as a business, don't sell on price because it's not a commodity. As I said, everyone's an individual.
Yeah.
So I could have a single person, but they could be an entrepreneur. They could have children and not be technically married. They could have a foothold in other jurisdictions. They could be looking to inherit a lot of wealth. They could already have trusts. They could already own. Do you understand where I'm coming from? But you're single.
Yes.
And I could have someone who's married and don't have half what a single person has.
Yeah.
Then I could have blended families, and that could be a super complex situation. So do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
So hence I love unraveling the problems, but everyone is different. So that's why I'm saying it's so important just to speak to the right kind of advisor, bespoke to your personal situation. And I really do challenge people to educate themselves so they can ask the right questions to their advisors. Challenge your advisors. That's what I'm saying. Rather than rely on them, so that we make sure that we can get the right knowledge. So it's hard to answer your question because it's like, well, everyone is different.
Yes.
The only thing I would say from a tax perspective, a single person will have less tax allowances compared to a married couple, or even a widow or widower.
Yeah.
Someone who's about to get married, if they have a will, it will be null and void under law. Have they contemplated that? Did they even know about this? So we put a clause in to risk mitigate that. If their parents are thinking about giving them property, no, don't do it. Let's have a conversation. So it's tax is normally the main situations between a single person, married couple, and then blended families. Blended families more so is, well, how do you want the wealth distributed? Because one half of the family may not all be your children, versus the other side of the family. How does that look? Just because we all say we trust each other doesn't mean that when that time comes, what you think is what's going to happen. Still get it written down. So this is where the blended family is just so important to have the right kind of planning, get the right kind of information, and get the documents drafted appropriately. And that's why trust is so important within wills, as well as lifetime trust. So for flexibility purposes.
Well, I can say I went through that transition from single to blended family.
Yeah.
And when I was single, I had a will.
Yeah.
And I was a single mother, one child.
Yeah.
So I had been living my life and working and building my little pot of wealth, just thinking that it would all go to my daughter.
Yes.
And that was the will. It was so simple.
Yeah.
And I was working already working in financial services, not doing a lot of what I'm doing now.
Okay.
But I remember one of the financial planners did a presentation for our team just to show us how they would deal with clients. And she said, you know, for a single person, if they get married, their will is null and void. And I thought, what? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So, you know, because I'm at the point where I'm about to get married.
Yeah.
My husband doesn't have any children.
Right.
I've got children.
Yeah.
So I say to him, we're going to have to do our wills, obviously, after we get married.
Yeah.
And during that process, it was such a difficult process, I think emotionally, and also it kind of erased everything that I had been sort of planning for.
Yeah.
Because now I'm thinking all of this stuff that I had been doing was for this person.
Yes.
Now I'm married. We don't have any children together. He's got no children. And so his beneficiaries are other people who are not even in the house, maybe not even in the country. They're other people.
Yes.
And, you know, we've just bought a house together.
Right.
So how does this work?
Exactly.
And I'd really encourage people to start thinking about those things, because it's easy to get married. It's easy to get divorced, get into another relationship. But I just wonder, people who've been married 3-4 times, or even not, you know, you've had children, you didn't get married, you were cohabitating with people, and then you get married.
Yeah.
What a nightmare, because I went through that and I've only got one child. I have been married once.
Right. Yeah.
So I completely hear you about it's very nuanced. It's about your scenario.
Yeah.
And I guess me sharing that story is just also trying to highlight that it's a very emotional process.
It is.
And I feel having someone neutral in the process is a really good thing.
It's important.
Yeah. Because the solicitor asks so many questions that I think if we hadn't gone through that process, we wouldn't have done the will. We'd be fighting right now, trying to work out who's going to get what.
Yeah. It's important.
Very, very, very important. So we've talked about wills, we've talked about the trust, and a little bit about the estate planning. I grew up in Zimbabwe. I'm assuming you've got links outside of the UK as well. And the people who I consider to be part of my community have got links in different parts of the world. And some people I know have got properties in Spain, you know, holiday properties in Spain. I've got a dream about building a house back home in Zimbabwe, or maybe buying in South Africa. And what are the things that people need to think about if we're acquiring properties and things outside of the UK when it comes to our wills, trusts, and estate planning?
It's a very important point, actually. And a lot of wills I see, well, let me talk about the law first. And then, because we have international private law with pretty much 99% of the countries around the world. UK law, if you're a UK citizen or resident, normally it's domicile, but I think that rule is now kind of phasing out. Then your wealth, inheritance tax is based on worldwide assets. And so if I've got clients who have a foothold or in different jurisdictions around the world, it's so important that they should really have it managed independently rather than having one executor in this country trying to reverse engineer and figure out the value of the estate, and then on top of that, how it's going to be distributed, if at all, because of poor planning. So I always say, you know, get a will in that jurisdiction, and just keep the wealth in the UK. Everything that you got abroad, deal with it in that jurisdiction separately. But the UK will, well, the law states that it must be stipulated in writing if you are not going to include the jurisdiction that you have wealth in to be part of your, or not to be part of your estate for probate purposes.
Okay.
So the best way to do that would be via the will. Else, naturally, international law will kick in. And it can get very complex. So let's say you got a UK citizen who passed away in a different jurisdiction and they had £1 million in their pocket in that jurisdiction, then the jurisdiction will have priority compared to
over
the UK.
Okay.
But the UK is like, well, hang on a minute, they're a UK citizen. How's that wealth going to work? So these rules have to be put in place at the very start. So even how we repatriate our funds, how money is distributed, how we own. I know everyone talks about the income tax side of things, but and now the HMRC are very open globally about how taxes are calculated, etc. It's important that the wills are worked out in such a way that the individual jurisdictions, the estate planning is done in that jurisdiction, especially if it's a religious-based jurisdiction where it's not like here, or what do you call it now, constitutional-based jurisdiction, mainly Europe, where it's a forced heirship situation, where over here we've got testamentary freedom. It's just different. So we've got to make sure that the rules and the wills or equivalent documents are drafted in those jurisdictions so that it's just, again, less headache for the families when someone passes. And that's something that is very specialist. Again, the average will writer may not be aware of that. And even in the probate world, you've got specialist lawyers who speak the languages in different jurisdictions that will know the law in France and know the law in Germany to argue on the UK side who gets what. It's so complex.
Wow.
So yeah, it's just easier just to keep the wealth where it needs to be.
Okay, all right. And you mentioned 2 words or 2 phrases, forced heirship and testamentary freedom. Can you just break those down? Because I'm like, what?
Okay. So in the UK, we have testamentary freedom. So you can pretty much decide who gets what.
Okay.
There's no set rule. The only limitation is that siblings, or children, should I say, and partners, well, married couples. All right, let me start again. Under the law, if you have children, ideally they should be equally benefiting. Else, if one feels that they have not been equally benefited, they can make a claim on the estate.
Right.
If you're married, then your spouse does have an entitlement to your wealth. If you're divorced, depending on the timing of the divorce, that could also be the case. And the biggest one is if you're cohabiting or living as if you are man and wife, that partner can also make a claim on your estate. So outside of that, you have complete testamentary freedom as to who you want to transfer your wealth to. Where parts of Europe, most of Europe, it's just a set rule. Like if you die, it goes to A, B, C, D.
Okay.
This is how it's done. There's no argument around it unless you put plans in place for that to not happen. And parts of Brazil and South America as well.
Okay.
That's the forced heirship rule. So, and even if you're married versus not being married, if you have debts, do you want your loved ones to take those debts on? That's a hell of a headache.
Yeah.
So it's a different ballgame. Hence, get the expert advice in that jurisdiction to understand how it all works.
Gosh, knowledge is definitely power, because I can think of so many people I know personally who've got assets all over the place.
Yeah.
Or even if I'm thinking about the younger generation now, they're not very tied to, say, the UK as such. They go all around the world. They are nomads. So if you've worked in one country and you've got cash sitting there and all, oh my goodness, it's certainly worth having those conversations.
And the way I see it is having the right team.
Yes.
Because when you're in a position where you can be a nomad and you got the wealth distributed in different jurisdictions, you need the right team, decent law firms, because trusts are not recognized globally. It's only Commonwealth countries. So parts of Europe, most of Europe won't recognize trusts formally.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Gosh.
There's something called the Recognition of Trust Act,
right.
Which is under the Geneva Convention, which just says, all of Europe, this is how trust works. But it doesn't mean that Europe should subscribe to a trust, but they may subscribe to a foundation or something similar. So hence, you need the team in the right jurisdiction. Some people might call it family offices, depending on the level of wealth that you reach and where your footholds start to should be established to make sure there's alignment.
That's very interesting. It seems all very complicated. A few years ago, I thought, you can just write your will yourself. And I've heard about, people writing like letters, etc. But more as the years have gone by, and from what I know and the type of clients I see on the wealth management side and on the coaching side, I do believe it's important to have a professional at least give you some sort of advice.
Yes.
But I'd like to know from you, because you're deep in this space, what are the things that someone should prepare before they approach you, or before they even start thinking about going and writing the will themselves? What are the sort of questions they should ask themselves? Are there any documents that they need to have to hand before they start the process?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. I think the basics to me is, as a estate planner, I'm looking at mitigating risk as much as possible. So during your lifetime, what are the risks? It's like a SWOT analysis. What are the threats? So you could pass away. All right, so a will is required. You could lose mental capacity. A will not take effect.
No.
Critical illness, all that stuff is your well. But these are risks that we have to mitigate against. So when it comes to mental capacity, are the right documents in place for someone to speak on your behalf, medically and finance and property basis? When we're looking at death and probate, debt is a huge deal. Like they must be paid off before probate is granted. So life insurance, if you have any, keep the paperwork. From an inheritance tax standpoint, are they in trust or not? Now, a good advisor should be able to ask you these questions in the process and then allow you to review that. If you're doing your research, hopefully those things should come up. But for me, that's I'm not expecting you to know that when they come to speak to me, but the information is on the website, on our socials. We do a questionnaire, we do a consultation, so we answer those questions. But the basics would be, do you have a lasting power of attorney in place to mitigate risk for mental health and loss of capacity, to make financial decisions and choices? And then, do you actually believe in creating generational wealth? Because some people are happy just to pay the taxes and that's it.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, and so if you do, then great, we can help you. So then what does that look like for you? What's the importance for you? If you don't, no problem, no love lost, just get a standard will and pay the tax and you're good. That's not advice, by the way, it's just it's a comment.
Yes.
So it's just, those are the things that spring to mind quickly. I'd also say if you're employed, because 2027 pensions are now going to be part of the inheritance tax.
Yes, they will. So
something to really consider. And if you've got death in service policy, again, that's part of your estate when you pass away, what's in place for that? These are the questions I would get people to think about. Life insurance, etc. Very important because it's all part of the bigger picture.
Yes.
And if you're a business owner, again, business relief is now capped to £1 million per director. Businesses didn't have to worry about that; it was unlimited. But if you've got a business that is worth more than £1 million and you've got big family or not many directors in place, what is the plan to transfer the wealth? If you're a farmer, agricultural landowner, again, these are things that are so important and crucial to be looking at.
Yeah, and I like that point you've made about business owners, because for most business owners and families that have got business owners, the business is the biggest asset.
Yeah.
It's the biggest asset. So, protecting it is really important. Now, I know because I deal with these documents every day. I see them every day when I'm dealing with clients, and I've also got one. For a will, you need to have, you should have an executor or executors.
Yeah.
And for trusts, they are trustees. But basically, these are the people who will remain behind and fulfill your wishes.
Yes.
How does one choose those people?
That's a good question. So from an executor point of view, the way I draft the wills, not a big deal. I mean, as long as they're young enough in your lifetime to be alive statistically to administrate the estate. Trustees is a whole different ballgame. Maybe executors a little bit, but trustees is a big deal because in a trust, especially a discretionary trust, nothing can happen unless all the trustees or majority of the trustees agree.
Okay. And
so with families, it's very easy for siblings to fall out, very low emotional intelligence. If you have an argument with someone, even if they're your friend, do you know they'll still do right by you, even if you're not talking?
Yeah.
Even if you know you're not talking, they'll do right by your children. They're not going to rob you, or they're going to completely switch on you. And how well do you know a person? So I always tend to stay away from look, leave just be one child. Don't put all the children as trustees. It's just not a good idea. Maybe use a professional plus one family member, et cetera, et cetera. Executors, be very careful with executorship. I had one case, I think it was even this week. It's just a sole professional lawyer, but with an executor, you are giving the power away. And if that lawyer, the family don't get on with them, or they're not going to do their job, the family are literally have no power unless they take the person to court or whatever, which you don't want. So try and choose maybe a family member or two, plus maybe as a backup, an executor, a professional executor, or if you trust them or their policies that they are there to work with or alongside the family, rather than just do something of their own accord and the family have no idea what's going on. That's important to do as well from an executorship point of view.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with those points. Would you say it's important for people to tell family what their wishes are in the will? This does not supersede a will, right? But you're telling them what you've put in your will and that you've set up a trust and this is the purpose of the trust? Or should it be like in the movies where someone dies and then everyone's called by the solicitor and the will is read out and it's the first time that people have heard about all of this?
It's a bit of a myth about sitting around a table and being read out. But there's nothing wrong maybe with the executors knowing in advance what the will's saying. Some people do tell their family members like where to find it, what their wishes are, but the will should do the heavy lifting anyway. I think it's down to personal preference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But I guess at the end of the day, your wishes are written down there in black and white, so it's pretty difficult for people to dispute.
Yeah. And the main thing is, if a will can't be found, it's deemed that it doesn't exist.
Oh, so you could have written it, but it can't be found.
Yeah, if it can't be found, then it's as if it doesn't exist at all.
How much time does one have, or does the family have, to produce this will?
There's no time limit for probate.
Okay.
But the time limit is more for inheritance tax, and if you want to make any major changes to the distribution of wealth, it's this 2-year window after death.
Okay.
And for inheritance tax, it's a 6-month window after death to pay it off. And obviously, if you've got any mortgages or debts, major debts, they want their money back ASAP.
Yeah.
So trusts or life insurance policies in trust are so important. Outside of that, there is no time limit for probate. You can do it whenever you want.
However long. So I'm just trying to work out then, if my will can't be found, at what point does the state's will take effect?
Once if it can't be found, because what normally happens is you've got to assign whether you're going to have administrators, i.e. if someone dies intestate, you get letters of administration. If someone dies testate, then you have a will.
Okay.
So if there's a copy that says, of the will signed, but we need to get the original, then most likely the will, the executors would still be appointed. But until the original can be found, it's touch and go.
Yeah.
it's heading more to probate in terms of time limit and stuff like that. But ultimately, it's important that the original can be found, and the executors will be asked for their ID to prove that they say they're who they are. And then they have a legal responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility to assess the estate, check it, make sure it's done correctly, and assign or report to HMRC accordingly.
Yeah.
So that's really where it's important to have the right executors. If you don't know anyone, maybe have a professional, but ideally have one personal friend alongside a professional trustee or executor, because again, if the family don't get on with the executor, communication now starts to break down. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And you probably won't get the help that you think you need because it's just been messed up in the first place.
Yeah. So true. And just going back to that point about family members not being able to find the will, or the will just not being able to be found, I can see how it can create huge problems for people who've been left behind, especially if there are debts that need to be paid, because now there's a delay in money being released, or the money ends up going to the wrong, not the wrong people, but not to the people who you intended it to go to, so that they could pay off those debts or do all these other things.
Exactly.
So, oh gosh. Yes, we need to get our houses in order.
Yes, important.
Get our houses in order. So we've talked about executors, trustees, and all of that stuff. Do you think, or would you say it is important for families to have discussions around estate planning?
Without a doubt.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's good that families know what's next. Because it's not even about death, it's about transfer of wealth. That's what the rich do. They will have conversations about pensions and set up trusts for their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and what is the family rules on marriage, especially if they have businesses and stuff, and they got a modicum of wealth. They don't want a third party coming into that family, divorcing in a year to get 50% of the wealth that child has. So hence, I think family charters and families having discussions are so important. Even if they don't know what they don't know, they can go to someone to get the help that they need to get. But it's crucial, very crucial.
Yeah. And when would you say someone should set up a will? Because, like I said, I had a will when I was single, and then I got married. I could have just thought, why should I get a will now? I'll wait until I get married.
Yeah.
Or if I hadn't gotten married, I'd still be waiting.
Right.
Now.
Yeah.
So when would you say people should put a will in place?
As soon as possible, if you're 18, as soon as possible, because there are digital assets, and the younger generation have loads of pictures and recordings and
Bitcoin.
Bank accounts and digital assets, exactly. And so they need a digital executor who understands that world, who can track it. The social media accounts should be updated so that third parties can access it, else it's almost impossible to get access to those. And if you've got precious memories on digital format now, how do you access those precious memories?
Yeah.
So 18, or you got the YouTuber, right, who's making loads of money.
Yes.
It's not hard. Or launch a huge business via YouTube. It's not hard. People are doing it. So the will is vital. And I say, yes, soon you're legally able to, age 18, get something in place. Okay, remember, I stress this, everyone is unique and different. So we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the first part of your question. What was the second part of your question?
Yeah, it was around the timing when someone should set up a will. Because I was saying, I was single and thought, I could have thought I'll wait until I get married. But then I could still be single today and I'm still waiting.
Yeah.
So no will in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, it is down to personal situation, because if you're single but you've got a couple $100,000 in the bank, or whatever it might be, you might have a child.
Yes.
You might be in a relationship where, again, you've been with that person for more than a couple of years. So you're deemed as if you were married, even though you're not. and maybe one person owns assets, like, well, do you know what could potentially happen? Are you happy with what could potentially happen? That's where informed decisions can be made because they've been educated predominantly.
Yeah.
So it's important. Okay, everyone's different. That's why we've got to make sure.
Yeah. And it's important, I think, to also, from what I'm getting from this conversation, is to just sense check what you're putting in place with someone, even if it's just an informal consultation. And to your point about the importance of families having discussions, we all know different things. We've all experienced different things. So we might be able to collectively come up with a right solution for this person and that person, you know, based on their individual circumstances. One thing I always say to clients, we do it when it comes to investments, and they want us to do it with them. But when it comes to wills and things like power of attorney, we're not thinking about it, but that's review. Yes,
at least every 2 to 3 years, because situations change.
Exactly.
So often we just don't know.
Yeah.
And something could come around the corner, and or just don't get around to do it at all. It's so important. It's so important.
Can we talk a little bit about charities? I know some people will give part of their wealth to charity, they'll write it in their will, or all of it. Are there any benefits? Are there any negatives to doing that?
I think everyone's different. Some people just don't like charities, but there are some very powerful, especially from an inheritance tax position. I think I'll tell a story. It's a real one, actually. Client, 88, single, no children, owns a massive home up north, has 2 wealth advisors. So I think the estate is around about £2.5 million. Now, this is not a dig on wealth advisors, by the way, but it's something I come across often. So we're very good at making more money, but it's very rare to come across them thinking about the transfer of the wealth, especially in later years. So having a conversation with the gentleman, and he hadn't even heard of inheritance tax. I'm like, his response to me is like, well, I haven't ever inherited anything, so why am I paying any tax? And I said, well, you've got 2 wealth advisors, £800,000 being managed, and no one's had that conversation with you. And the will that was drafted originally was very much it's a massive. I have a bugbear. I hate drafting wills with specific legacies. It's a lot of work, and I'm not to get too technical, but there's 82 people named. Right.
82.
I'm sure it was 82 people. Yeah, it was a long list.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I think if he passed away, he would have been paying like £750,000 in inheritance tax. And then the other thing is that he was going to give the main home to a charity, but it still wouldn't have made a huge dent in the overall grand scheme of things.
Right.
Because I think if you give your assets away more than 10%, the inheritance tax rate drops from 40% to 36%.
36 years.
It's only a 4% difference. It will still get hit on.
There's nothing on that huge amount.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what we suggested is, well, why not set up your own charity? Get your own trust and set up your own charity. So there's such a thing as a charitable trust.
Right.
No inheritance tax to gift to charity. There's no capital gains tax to give to charity. There's no income tax issues given to charity. And if it's your own charity, all your wealth is going into it for a useful cause. So we saved him £750,000 in inheritance tax because he set up his own charity, and the will was done correctly. So we just set up a nil rate band trust in his will. So he's got £325,000 to distribute to all the friends and loved ones.
82 people.
Yep. So just cap it at £325,000. That was enough. The maths on that was interesting. Yeah. And then the rest of your wealth, we're going to just put it all into charitable trusts. very good example of how charities can be very powerful.
Thank you for that. Richard, thank you so much. This is definitely one of those that I'll be watching over and over again and sending to so many people. I'm not going to talk about trusts, wills, and inheritance, estate planning anymore. I'll just be like, watch this episode, because you have given us so much good, useful, practical, simple information. And I'm really, really grateful to you for that. And I hope that when I next do research to see how many people have got wills, it would have gone up.
Yes.
The percentage would have gone up, at least for the UK stats.
Yes.
I have one question that I ask all my guests,
Okay.
and I'd love to ask you that question. And the question is, what is the one wealth conversation you would like everyone to have?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. I think we've kind of touched on it, to be fair. I think this is, to me, I'm so passionate about it. Beyond that, it's just thinking about how we educate our children, if we have them, or the next generation, because you're probably aware, there's a saying that wealth is transferred from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. So one generation is working really, really hard to accumulate the wealth. The second generation enjoys the wealth and then lose it, and the third generation start all over again. How can we get it beyond 3 generations? So it's multi-generational wealth.
Yeah.
And that starts with having education in the dining room tables, at home, which means that our families need to be educated so we can educate our children. Schools don't talk about this. Who talks about it?
Yeah.
It's only those in the know that know how to continue. There's something called a custodian to wealth. There's a member of the family whose sole responsibility is to transfer the family wealth to the next generation, and you nominate a new custodian per generation. So it'd be nice to get rid of the narrative, to especially in certain communities, so we can start to see that happening. So I think for me that would be a brilliant conversation to have.
Yeah, I like that. Who are the custodians to wealth in the family?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Richard. I really appreciate your time and your knowledge. I think we've already decided we've got a topic for another podcast episode. Own nothing, control everything. Right. And I'm looking forward to that one.
No problem at all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me once again. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Cheers.